You might think Stray is just an adorable adventure featuring a cat, and while the cat part is true, Stray is actually an incredibly tragic, dark and mysterious tale. This is quite literally a post-apocalyptic tale. There are no humans left, and while the game gives us hints, it doesn't explicitly state what happened to them all. The game raises many questions. What exactly happened to the humans? What's going to happen now that they've all gone? What will happen to the robots after the ending of the game? What is this mysterious network? And what are these creepy eye monsters in the sewers? The game raises all these questions but really doesn't answer any of them. It gives little hints here and there, and it gives an explanation for what happened to the humans, but I don't actually think that's the entire truth. In today's video, I'm going to attempt to answer all of these questions. As usual, I'm going to give you the facts that the game gives you, but I'm also going to give you my own speculation and theories as well, including one theory that I think ties all of these mysteries together. So as I said, Stray is actually a post-apocalyptic tale. Our protagonist, the cat, finds itself separated from its family. These cats seem to be living within the walls of what is known as Walled City 99, and once our cat gets separated, it seems like the only escape is through the city. Now this game takes place in the future. While the exact date is unclear, it's at least past the 2100s. And it's entirely possible that Walled City 99 is named this way because humanity made so many new cities that they just stopped bothering naming them. Walled City 99 is described as being the safest city in the world, and the reason it's described this way is it's actually more like a giant bunker. And this bunker can be sealed hermetically. A hermetic seal meaning that nothing can get in or out, not even air particles. Now it's never explicitly stated what the walled city was created to protect from, but there are a few good assumptions that we can make. Things like nuclear war and radiation fallout, things like major plague outbreaks, perhaps even climate change. All of these things could be potentially prevented inside a sealed off city. While the rest of the world suffers, you're all safe inside your giant bunker. Seems like a great idea in theory. And judging by the slums, it seems like this city was massively overpopulated, even with all the new buildings being created. So whatever the case, this city eventually was put into lockdown. Now throughout the game we do find out that apparently the outside world is a barren wasteland, and while it's not entirely clear whether this is just robot propaganda or whether it's actually true, let's just assume that it is true for argument's sake. So what went wrong inside the city, and why are there no humans left now? Well, the game does give us an explanation of what happened. Most of the exposition in this game is given by B12, our robot helper. B12 is actually a human who downloaded his consciousness into the network. This consciousness then got transferred into this robot, and this robot helps us throughout our adventure. Eventually B12 figures out that there was a plague outbreak in the city, and this is the explanation that the game gives as to where all the humans went. But I actually don't think this is the entire picture. I actually think the fall of humanity was far more complicated than just a plague outbreak. Well, why do I think this? If they died in a plague, where are they all? Where are all the dead bodies? Throughout this entire game, this entire giant city, you never see a single dead body. You see plenty of dead robots, but never once do you see a dead body. So why is this? If a plague was what killed everybody, there would have to be dead bodies around. Just think about it. If the plague ended all of humanity, there would be no humans left to bury all the bodies. So where did the bodies go? I have a theory about this one, so buckle up. Later on in the game, we are introduced to these enemies called the Zerks, and I do think the Zerks are integral to my theory, but probably not in the way that you're thinking. These little creatures will actively try to eat you. They will try to eat the cat, and it's also heavily implied that they also try to eat the robots, as we know that they are able to eat metal. So what are these Zerks? Well, the game explains that these are actually bacteria. Bacteria designed by humans. You see, the Zerks were actually an attempted solution to one of the biggest problems of Walled City 99, and that is rubbish. So as I said earlier, this city is heavily implied to have been massively overpopulated by humans before they all died. And we also know that the humans in this city were separated into two different classes. You have the humans who live in the slums, and you have the humans who live in Midtown. We can just call these the upper and lower classes, as geographically this actually makes sense. The upper class was living in the upper areas and the lower class were living in the lower areas. Now, just like humans in our world, the same thing happened between the classes in the city. The upper classes treat the lower classes like crap. One of the major problems inside this sealed city is that there was nowhere to put the rubbish. Humans have this tendency to create things, and many of the things that we create never really have anywhere to go once we're done with them. This is a real problem that we have in our world now. Most of our rubbish ends in one of two places: landfill or the sea, and both of these things are not really ideal. In fact, both of these things are pretty terrible places to put our rubbish, but that is just how it goes. In this sealed city, you don't have access to either of those things. So this led to one giant problem. Well, where does the rubbish go? For the upper classes, this was no problem. They literally just dumped it on the lower class. They threw their rubbish down below where it was somebody else's problem. However, the slums, which seemed to be way more populated, now suddenly had a huge problem on their hands. What to do with all this rubbish? Not only did they have the problem of the rubbish, but they also had a problem of hygiene. Living in filth quite often leads to disease, and that is something that we'll come on to later. So the rubbish began to pile up, and it was a huge problem for Walled City 99. But this is where Nico Corp came in. See, Nico Corp, get it? Eco or Neco? This was one of the large companies or corporations within the city, and their job was mainly garbage disposal. You see, they realized that it was just piling up and up with nowhere to go, and they realized this was going to cause huge problems down the line. So their proposed solution was bacteria. Like I said, they don't have a sea or a landfill to dump it into, so they came up with the idea of bacteria that could eat it. This is actually something that scientists are kind of working on now, and while we won't get into that in today's video, it is very interesting that this is something that might potentially happen. So the bacteria was being used to get rid of this rubbish, and that was actually going fine for quite some time, until the plague. You see, I think the plague was just the catalyst for humanity's downfall. As I said earlier, the slums were so densely populated that a small outbreak would rapidly spread throughout the confines of the city. This is why, for example, places like Britain struggle really heavily with plagues and diseases. We have a very recent real-world example of this happening, and one of the reasons why we struggle so much is because we're so massively overpopulated. It's very hard to distance yourself from other people when you all live together like sardines. This is exactly what happened in Walled City 99. The plague spread so rapidly, people started to die off in droves. But like I said, this couldn't have killed everybody, because if that was the case, where are all the bodies? Well, this was just the beginning of the downfall. With such a huge, drastic, and very fast drop in population, Walled City 99 suddenly found itself struggling with infrastructure. All of those people in the city must have had jobs. After all, living in an ecosystem like this means that everyone has to pull their weight. Things like fresh water, food, doctors, all of these things are essential. When you have a sudden and drastic loss of population like this, you're losing people that work on those infrastructure. You're losing doctors, you're losing water treatment specialists, for example. So now all of a sudden the city was facing a new problem: lack of resources and lack of human resources. I think this is what actually happened. Humanity started to struggle to do the day-to-day things that they were doing before. There were just no people to do the jobs. And one of those jobs, for an example, was managing and maintaining the bacteria. With less people in charge of things like this, the bacteria began to become out of hand. And one of the big reasons for this is the lack of sunlight. This entire city has no direct sunlight, and in fact the roof is an artificial sky. Something that we found out quite recently is that sunlight, or more likely UV light, actually kills many forms of bacteria. So yeah, gamers, open your windows now and again, alright? This provided the absolute dream breeding ground for these bacteria, and that is why they have evolved so quickly, relatively over the last 100 years or so. They have evolved so quickly into this new form. Humanity simply had no way to fight back against these bacteria, and I think the survivors of the plague were eaten by the Zergs. But this leads me on to another theory with the bodies. All we have left now are these robots, known as the Companions. These were designed to help the people in the city with their day-to-day jobs. After all, a city of this size and of this dense population would require a lot of help, and perhaps because many of the people died with the plague, these robots were needed more and more than ever, and so the city created more and more of them to help out to do the jobs that they had lost people to do. But the problem of these robots is that they were designed to be mindless. Most of the ones we meet throughout the game are actually an evolved form of these companions, and the game does explain that they evolved this way after humanity's downfall. Before the downfall of humanity, these robots were essentially just mindless drones. We can see from the ones at the end that even hundreds of years after humanity's downfall, they just continue to do their mindless labor. So then, what would a robot like this do when it came across a large amount of dead bodies? My guess is throw them down into the sewers. Throw them with the rest of the garbage. I actually have a good theory on this though. Perhaps one of the reasons why we see no dead bodies is because those dead bodies were all thrown down into the sewers where the Zurks were. Now, like I said, the Zurks can eat almost anything. They are known to be able to eat metal, and the fact that they attacked the cat implies that they can eat through organic material in no problem. After all, if they can eat metal, I'm sure they can eat bone. But we also have these incredibly weird eyeballs that just appear in the sewers, and then there is never an explanation given as to what exactly they are. All we know is that they appear where the Zurks are. Well, my theory on this is that this is Zurk refuse. I don't really know a polite way to say this, but we know that Zurks only do one thing: they eat. And anything that eats also has to, well, think about it this way. The Zurks feasted on so many humans, some plagued, some who died of natural causes, and perhaps some that were alive. But either way, they feasted on so many humans, the city was so densely populated that all of that refuse began to collect in the sewers where the Zurks breed. That refuse had so much human organic material left behind that it began to evolve. This game actually has heavy themes of evolution. The robots, for example, have evolved organically without humans. They evolved this way just because they wanted to. From mindless drones to an entire culture of themselves with their own language and their own behaviors. Yes, behaviors that are mimicking humans, but still behaviors that they chose to do themselves. The Zurks evolved from bacteria, probably small enough that we couldn't see, to these little head crab creatures that we can see. And maybe I'll bring this up in another theory one day, but there is even a hint in this game that cats are evolving too. After all, this cat is far more smart than your average house cat. It can follow complex instructions, it can use objects and tools, and it can seem to understand language from B12. The idea that this cat is a more evolved version of your house cat that you might own really is heavily implying that cats are eventually going to evolve into some sort of sentient race, just like primates did. And perhaps now that humans are gone, this is the perfect opportunity for them to do so. We even have a very small hint at this with this image. So it's entirely possible that these eyes are the next evolution of human being. We also know that these eyes are a hive mind, and so it's entirely possible that the human consciousness that was left behind evolved into this new, horrific, but yet still living entity. This brings me on to yet another creepy detail in this game though, and that is the mysterious network. This is something that is barely talked about in the game. B12 barely even mentions it, and he is arguably a part of it. Right at the beginning of the game, we see these big letters, network. And then throughout the game, we actually have an experience with this network. Before we meet B12, B12 has uploaded his consciousness into a computer. Sci-fi mumbo jumbo, sure, but the idea that his consciousness is living on in digital form is very interesting. But this actually allows B12 to hack into almost any screen, anything electric in this city, and use it for his own means. He uses this to guide the cat towards him. That means that almost everything electrical in this city is connected, one giant network, almost like one hive mind. If we go by the theme of evolution in this game, it's entirely possible that that network itself is also evolving, with no humans to stop it, artificial intelligence learning by itself. This is something again that humans now are trying to look into, the idea of creating an artificial intelligence and then letting it learn itself. With humans being gone for at least 100 years, this network might have had time to learn and grow. So why is this important? Right at the end of the game, once the cat escapes the city, we get a very mysterious and very brief flicker on these computer screens to the left. Now, the last thing that B12 does is hack into this network to override and open the city that was on lockdown that we presumed was left over from the humans before they all died. But actually doing this kills B12. It takes so much power for him to hack through it that it kills him. Well, what if that was because the network was fighting back? Again, this network that has had hundreds of years to grow and evolve. What would that mean? It would mean that this city has an artificial consciousness, one that could be tied to the hive mind of the humans. Like I said, we really don't get an explanation of what the hell these eyes are. All we know is that they're a hive mind and they crop up where the Zerks are. But something also very interesting about them is that they don't seem to be weak to UV light. We know that the Zerks will die when put under UV light, and that makes sense because they are made of bacteria. Once the roof is opened, the Zerks just all begin to die. But we know that the eyes aren't weak to UV light, meaning they would continue to live on. Well, what if somehow that eye hive mind has got into the network? There is also a little hint at this. Just before we meet these eyes, we do see a robot that is on the wall. It is turned on and it is conscious. It follows you around the room, but it is trapped and it cannot move, just like the eyes on the wall. This comparison between the organic and the inorganic is very apt. Once again, the robots mirror us. They too have their own form of evolution. Once the humans were gone, they began to evolve into their own way, in their own culture, a culture that mirrors ours, but a culture that is their own. But it's also entirely possible that these robots are a part of the network just like every other machine in this place. And it could only be a matter of time before the hive mind figures out how to control them. Perhaps humanity isn't quite done just yet. Honestly, I could theorize all day about the creepy mysteries of this game. These are just some of my thoughts and opinions about what we've been shown in Stray. There definitely is a deeper mystery here, and depending on how this video does, thanks YouTube algorithm, I might delve back into this a little bit more because this game truly is fascinating to play. There we go, I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a like, let me know down in the comments below what you think about my theory, and as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.